This is Chapter 5, Part 2. Now, I've skipped a couple of slides between the last segment and this one. Again, I'm going to be a little bit selective in this chapter because typical for this textbook, the authors cram too much stuff in. They really go overboard with what you get, and also they can be repetitive too. So I want to be a little selective in covering the material. I should be able to complete the rest of the material in this second segment. A word or two of warning about the internet. Again, nowadays, most of the time we do our literature searches to find articles and studies, etc., through the internet. Yes, you can do it the old-fashioned way and actually physically go over to the library and look at the shelves of books and try to find books, and or use desktops over at the actual library. But doing these literature searches is part of my job, because I have to do research as part of my job, and it's been a long time since I've been to the library because I just do everything electronically now. So the internet is very important, but you have to realize that you have to be selective and aware as you're finding papers, sources, books, ebooks, that sort of thing, because there's always the issue of quality and sort of the authority of the source that you are drawing upon. So if you do a search engine, use a search engine like the library database that I showed you earlier, the example, or if you were to use that Google Scholar, which is a commonly used, source, because they basically, search every study that's ever been done in the English language anyway, and even some from other languages. It's very thorough. The problem is that, let's say, for example, Google Scholar, if you went there and typed in keywords, it's going to spit out a bunch of studies, and it's not going to tell you, oh, these studies are good and these studies are bad. So any of these search engines, they don't tell you the quality of the studies. They just say, well, the study's out there. Here, we found the study. Here it is. You're going to have to evaluate it. If you use dictionaries and encyclopedias, usually that's only appropriate in your introduction when you're trying to define the topic and basically how people understand whatever concept you're going to be discussing in your paper. Let's stick with my example of impulsivity and violent behavior. What do we mean when we say violence? What do we mean when we say impulsivity? So you can use dictionaries for that kind of stuff, but otherwise, dictionaries and encyclopedias, or in a lot of classes, Wikipedia would not be an acceptable source. I tend to in my classes, I'm a little looser on that, but some professors are quite strict about the sources that you use. So you got to be careful about using encyclopedia type sources or a Wikipedia type source, because some people don't think that that's trustworthy enough. And many internet sites serve a commercial purpose. They're a business, they're trying to sell something, or you also have a lot of private individuals who have a lot of opinions and who will do blogs or conduct studies or conduct analyses of different topics. But again, it's a little bit dicey when you're just grabbing some random person or business off the internet. So usually it's best to rely on this. We have a list here of things that are usually fairly trustworthy. Again, no site is going to be 100% trustworthy, but these tend to try to give you the best data possible. If you go to academic sites, universities, government websites, nonprofit websites, nonprofit institutions, so organizations that are devoted, where they're trying to that have a priority of trying to accumulate and disseminate knowledge, and it's not so much a money thing, a profit thing, or it's not ideological. It's not, you should avoid websites where they're heavily political or something like that, because that's going to tend to be more likely to get propaganda, right? Where you're getting, what do we mean by propaganda? Well, that's information that's designed to push a particular political ideology. And that's a very common thing. It's in a lot of our research. You get people who have very sharp perspectives and they bring that to the research. But again, you just have to be aware of these issues as you're looking around for where you're getting your information from. Download and save all the material found on the internet. Sites are dynamic and you may not find the data a second time. Your institution may also require proof when defending your dissertation. Anyway, you just want to save, choose stuff carefully, save it, and document everything, and do a professional job that way. Putting your reading together. Create a literature-based foundation for your work through putting material together, which is not usually related. So they're just giving you different strategies of, what's the theme of your literature review? How are you trying to do your literature review? There's different ways of doing it. And you can, I don't know that we need to go through each one of these. Again, I'm a little bit concerned about time, but just, let's do it this way. Have you take a look at those. I put these a little bit lower priority, so I'm not going to stress them. But there's just different things you can be trying to accomplish from your literature review. When I write a literature review, what I'm always trying to do is I'm trying to answer the question, what do we know? Based on research, what do we know about this topic? What's been done already? Do they agree? Do they not agree? Maybe a little bit about the quality of the studies, how, things like how big the samples were, and, just to try to give the reader a sense of the quality of the studies and which studies we should rely on the most because they were really the best done. And this research methods course will kind of teach you what makes a good study. So in the future, after this course, you should be a little bit better at being able to say, okay, this study, we really want to focus on this one in our literature review because they did a really good job, and that's most convincing. So you want to be concerned about quality when you're writing this up. Focus on the best studies and say where studies are kind of weak and maybe they shouldn't be taken so seriously, or we don't put too much stock in these studies because they're really tiny samples and conveniently collected data from a convenient sample, that kind of stuff. So that's usually what I try to do. But people can do different things with their literature reviews. So take a look at this further into this list and see the different kind of things you could do. If you really want to be ambitious, we see here toward the bottom, develop a new perspective. So if you're kind of really interested in developing new theory, you might use your literature review as a way of saying, we really haven't been explaining violence very well. Look at all these studies, they're confusing and they're inconsistent, and the theories that they're based on have not really proven to be very fruitful. They're not giving us very good answers, and the findings are really all over the place. So maybe we need something fresh. That'd be an ambitious thing to do, is try to develop a new perspective. Anyway, so enough on those. You can take a little bit closer look. Now, definitely I want to, in this video segment, stress these two different types of reviews. That it's important to, I see these two types in the literature quite a bit. The first one they talk about systematic review, and then the next one they talk about is a narrative review. Now, they get into a lot of stuff here on this slide, but let me just give you a big picture on systematic review. A researcher who's trying to do a systematic literature review is trying to get every study that's out there that's relevant and to cover every one of them and not leave anybody out, not forget or ignore anybody. So you're trying to be completely thorough, systematic. That's what is implied there. And so you have a person, and I find myself a lot of times taking more of this sort of approach where I'm trying to say, what's everything that we've looked at? Let's try to find every little bit. And you're in a better position to do this if you pick an area of study that's really new or hasn't been studied too much, so there's not a lot to cover. Then you can cover all of it. If it's something that's been covered and researched a million times, you can't cover every study, and so you're going to have to be more selective. And that's this other study that we'll talk about here in a second, the narrative review. where you're selective. You're telling a story. Narrative is like telling a story. So what you're trying to do is your focus is not to try to cover everybody, include everybody, and not leave anybody out. It's picking the studies that you think are the highest quality, or the most interesting, or that give you interesting ideas that you want to expand on. And so you're trying more to make a point, to maybe develop a new perspective, or you're trying to, again, usually have some big point you're trying to make about how the research is really awful and we need to improve it, or there's a big something that's been missed here, we need to look at something new. So, and you usually do that with a select small number of studies that you're looking at really carefully, and these are high profile, important, classic studies or groundbreaking studies, or very popular studies, right? So you're looking at that, and again, the textbook is saying somewhat different things in these PowerPoint slides, but I'm giving you my take on it. And again, if you ever, for testing purposes, if there's ever a discrepancy where it seems like I'm saying one thing and the textbook is saying another, you want to go with me on this one, on the two, but I try not to do that. Sometimes the textbook will focus on one thing, or I'll emphasize something a little bit different, but that's not really contradicting. The one's not contradicting the other. Anyway, so bottom line, narrative is selective, and you're trying to tell a story and push a theme that you want to push. Systematic review is like that type of researcher doesn't want to leave anybody out, and all they're trying to do is just summarize, just to be able to reflect and summarize everything that's out there and boil it down. Bottom line, here's what we find when we look at everything. So it's a different goal, two different goals there, and it's not that one is right or the other. They're just right or wrong. It's just that they're pursuing different priorities. Now, the last thing I'll talk about from this chapter is the referencing. And I'll just speak generally here, that, when you have to, all your papers need to have a reference list at the end, where in the paper, you every time you take a little one sentence, it's usually a couple of sentences, and you're citing something from one of these studies that you found, you're going to have a citation there, some information that lets the reader know that you got this information from a study, and where that study is from, right? You're giving credit to somebody for that information that you've included in your paper. So that's called a citation, where you cite in the way that we usually do it in our disciplines. It's this author date system that they talk about lower down on the slide here, author date system. So the way that I usually will cite a paper is, let's say that the paper was done by some woman by her last name is Jones, and she did the paper in 2019. That I'll say Jones found in 2019 that in a sample of college students that impulsivity was significantly related to more violence. And so, see, I'm putting Jones 2019 in the sentence there so that people know where that information is coming from. And then at the very end of the paper, you have the references or reference lists, sometimes called bibliography or sources, and you're going to list Jones' full information at the end of the paper, this references list. I showed you when we went through that library example that there was a big list of references, like 60 papers that were listed, all the bibliographic information, the names of the people who did the study, the year that it was done, the title of the study, the journal that it was found in, and then, what that specific journal information, all of that goes into these references, this reference list. And then usually a reference list is going to be all the studies, and the way we typically do it is alphabetically listed. So, Adams is going to be first, and then Barney is going to be second. You go all the way alphabetically A through Z. That's the author date system. That's what we tend to use in the social sciences, whether if psychology, You use APA. In sociology, we'll use ASA. Criminology, a lot of times we use APA, and I believe that's the case for social work as well. Anyway, whatever system you're using of references, it's always going to have, you're going to have this sort of citation inside in the actual writing of the paper itself, where you're going to have the authors who wrote that paper. You're going to give the author's name and the year that the paper, the date the paper was published. That's the way we do things. And then you got the reference list, as I've said before, at the very end of the paper, listing all of those papers, all those sources, books, everything at the end of your paper. The other referencing system that I sometimes see students use, but it's not really the way to do it in our disciplines, sociology, etc., is to use the footnote system. So there you have some information you put in your paper, and then you'll have a little, maybe a number, and you gotta look at the bottom of the page, and there's a footnote at the bottom of the page saying where you got that information from, all the bibliographic information. That's a footnoting type system. And of course, that's still done. You see that in different places. But that's not generally the way we do things. That's a little bit of a different type of system. That's not, you don't use that too much in the social sciences from what I've seen. I might see that in legal studies and law books, that kind of law journals, that kind of thing. But anyway, that's usually when you're taking classes from us, if you're taking sociology classes, you're going to probably need to use the ASA formatting style. And all you have to do is do a Google search, and you can put an ASA formatting style, and it gives you the rules of how you do this, citations, and the list of references at the end is exactly how to do that, because they're very specific and have very specific rules about how that's done. So you can either ASA or APA, depending on, you got to find out from your professor what sort of formatting they want, and give them whatever they want, and stay consistent with it all the way through your paper. But anyway, this is all really important stuff. It makes your paper professional and scholarly, and it's on all papers need to have that reference list where, again, you're giving credit to other people for the information that you're presenting in your paper. So you see at the bottom one here, again, I can skip a lot of this. I always include a list of references at the end in any event. So, so there's different ways of doing it, but you always want to give a list of references, because, again, this is a way to show that this information is not yours. You got it from these people, and you're also doing a service to the reader, because the reader might be really interested in the topic, and they may want to learn more about impulsivity and violence, as they say that's what my paper was about. Well, if I give them the list of all these studies at the very end, they can take that information and go look up those studies and study it further, get into it, take it further, and learn more from those studies. So I'm doing them a service by letting them know all the information that they would ever need to be able to track down that study or track down that book, whatever source it is that you're referencing, right? So you're doing a service. It's a professional thing to do. It's the honest thing to do, because you're giving credit to the people who did the studies, and you're also helping your readers as well. Now, I'm going to skip this last part. It's important, but again, there's so much stuff in these chapters, really too much. So I'm going to trim a little bit. I'll let you folks cover this on the couple of slides on plagiarism. Let me just say that I do like the first point here. Plagiarism means pretending that we ourselves wrote what others actually wrote. So the overarching principle that you want to follow to avoid plagiarism when you're writing up these research papers, these papers for your different classes, is don't ever write information that came from somebody else and then not give them credit. Because if you don't give them credit, then you're acting like it's your idea, and you don't want to do that. So if you got information from someplace, tell us where you got it from. Use that tell us the author and the year, follow whatever system you're following, APA, ASA, whatever. Tell us. That way you're giving us, it's very simple, but you're giving us credit. You're giving credit to the people who wrote the paper, and you're avoiding get yourself in trouble with this plagiarism where you're acting like it's your idea, your information, when it's not. So that's just the honest thing. That's the overall strategy here. Don't ever act like it's your thought, it's your writing, your sentence, when it's somebody else's, right? And to be honest, when I write papers, just about every sentence I write, it's almost crazy. Almost every sentence I write has at the end of that sentence the author and the authors and the date. It comes from some paper, and I make sure that my readers know it came from same paper, so I give them credit. Jones, 2019, and then I'll write the next sentence, right? And the next sentence might be, Fernandez, 2015. And the next sentence, it'll be another one and another one. I mean, I have, we saw that paper that I found through the library that had 60 references, 60 different papers or books, whatever, mostly papers, studies, 60 of them at the end of it. And I easily do that when I write a paper. I'll easily have 60, 70, 80 references because it's important that I cover everybody and I give them credit for it. So you want to do the same thing. All right, we're getting long again. We'll stop there. Make sure that you go through PowerPoint slides that I've skipped and also any chapter materials as well.